AI field were fringe experiments with results that were usually more intriguing for what they got wrong than what they got right. But in 2022, AI-driven image generators have made a quantum leap in quality, speed, and affordability. It is not an exaggeration to say that thanks to these tools, never in the history of civilization has it been easier, faster, or cheaper to produce professional-looking visuals of anything a person could dream up, with or without even an artistic training whatsoever. This is both, of course, extremely intriguing, but also extremely concerning at the same time, especially when it comes to questions about serious consequences for debates about ethics, plagiarism, ownership, and the value of making arts in the first place. Today's event will explore what can come out of the interaction between the arts and the world of AI, with a focus on the questions of the role art can play to build a trustworthy AI. The Zurich University of the Arts and the Fine Arts Department particularly had been collaborating with the ETH AI Center since last year. We have set up an educational format between the art and technology students, and this included several workshops and lectures, an exchange between the faculties of both universities. And the students were exploring together what can happen when the worlds of the arts and the AI get together. We would like to foster the transdisciplinary approach further through activities in the education and research inside and outside the universities in the future. ETH has also initiated various fellowships for artists whom we will like to connect to the Art University and to our facilities as well. Let me introduce now ADRIAN NOTZ, who will moderate today's event. He has a lot of titles. ADRIAN NOTZ is a curator at the ETH AI Center. He's also curator of the Art Encounters Biennial in 2023. It's upcoming in Temeshwar. He's mentor for the creative strategy and vision at the European Center for Contemporary Art in Cluj. ADRIAN was the artistic director of Cabaret Voltaire, which is the birthplace and the artistic center of Dada, you might know very well, in Zurich. And there he had curated lots of exhibition events, activities and actions, conferences with artists all around the world, and also with other cultural thinkers. ADRIAN is also the king of Elgalang Vargaland. He is an NSK diplomat and Chevalier de la Tombe de Bakunin. And besides of all of this, ADRIAN NOTZ has organized and curated numerous culture events around the globe. I would like to thank to all participants of today's panel, the technical staff and the volunteers, and also pass a very big thank to Florence Balthasar, who is here in the front, the head of international affairs at the Zurich University of the Arts, for the smooth organization of this event. Thank you, Florence. I wish you an inspiring event and will now hand over to ADRIAN. Thank you.
Thank you, SWETLANA, for this nice introduction to this morning's talk about art for an ethical AI. As SWETLANA mentioned, I'm from the ETH AI Center, and together with one of the speakers today, with Nora Al-Badri, we started last year a program which we call AI and Art, with the idea to bring art into this technological and engineering and science context of the ETH and the AI Center. The AI Center is a kind of competence hub within the ETH. That is, to put it very simply, it gathers all AI activities within the ETH. That means all 16 departments are part of the ETH AI Center, as well as 120 faculties ranging from chemistry, biology, to, of course, computer science or healthcare and so on, or even astrophysics and seismology. So it is a very transdisciplinary, exciting place. In the AI Center, we also have 42 fellows on PhD and postdoc level, with the idea to bridge exactly these gaps that I was just mentioning. So all our fellows have two supervisors in two different fields and departments, and like that we are kind of one could say a bridge builder for the ETH, within the ETH in terms of artificial intelligence. On my very first day, when my boss, Alex, told me about the ETH AI Center, I thought it is a little bit like we are the punks of the ETH, because we are in between everything and trying to bridge the different disciplines. The AI Center has also been founded in this context of an emerging technology, artificial intelligence, and also the digital transformation. And within this context, which is advancing rapidly, one could say exponentially, it is very hard to keep up with the latest developments in this field. The legal regulations and ethical norms are still, let's say, diplomatically under construction. One still doesn't really know what all kind of ethical implications these new technologies have, how can one regulate it, how vast is the field of its influence. And so it is not surprising that one first ethics guideline for trustworthy AI is actually quite young. It is now 3 years old. It is from the EU Commission, a high-level expert group in artificial intelligence. And over there, in the frame of trustworthy AI, they have 3 points that AI should be lawful, ethical, and robust. I think lawful is kind of clear. We have laws, it should obey the law. Robust means that the technology should be kind of reliable, and ethical is, of course, because of the field of ethics, more open. And they say that the foundations of a trustworthy AI should follow 4 ethical principles, which would be the respect for human autonomy, prevention of harm, fairness, and explicability. And within this, the realization of a trustworthy AI should have 7 key requirements, which is human agency and oversight, technical robustness and safety, privacy and data governance, transparency, diversity, non-discrimination and fairness, societal and environmental well-being, and accountability. So some of our fellows are also trying to explore or research what is actually happening in this so-called black box of AI, because of its kind of self-dynamic development we are kind of retro-engineering the theory behind it. So this is a little bit, let's say, the framework in which we are talking. It is just the tip of the iceberg. And I would like to now introduce our 2 speakers and maybe give a small structure of today's morning. So we will first have Marie-France RAFAEL. She is a tenure-track professor in the Department of Fine Arts at the Zurich University of Arts. She holds a PhD in art history. She studied art history and film studies in Berlin and Paris. And from 2011 to 2015, she was a research associate at the Free University of Berlin, and until 2019 at the Muthesius University in Kiel in the Department of Spatial Strategies and Curatorial Spaces. She is notably the author of Reisen im Imaginativ, künstlerische Situationen und Displays, Travel in the Imaginary Artistic Situation and Displays, and of Ari Benjamin Meyer's Music on Display. She will give a first introduction into her work and reflection and, let's say, theory construction in relation to our topic today of art for an ethical AI. For about 15 minutes, we have to be very precise in time because we have another event following up. And then after Marie-France, we'll have Nora Al-Badri, my colleague at the AI Center, program director, artistic director of the program of the AI+Art program at the AI Center. And she is a multidisciplinary and conceptual media artist with a German-Iraqi background. Her works are research-based as well as paradisciplinary and as much post-colonial as post-digital. She graduated in political science at the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt. Her practice focuses on the politics and the emancipatory potential of new technologies, such as machine intelligence and data sculpting, non-human agency and transcendence. Al-Badri's artistic material is a speculative archaeology from fossils to artifacts or performative interventions in museums and other public spaces. that responds to the inherent power structures. She has exhibited in major museums around the world. And there's one project that actually relates a lot to this place, which we'll also hear from Nora. So now I would like to give the stage to Marie-France.
Thank you, Adrian, for this very nice introduction and welcome. And I'm very happy to be part of this panel, Art for an Ethical AI, as part of the Zurich meets Berlin during the Berlin Science Week. In my short input, I would like to focus on the questioning of the role of AI in societies. Or to phrase it differently, I would like to focus on artists' critical response to what I would like to describe as a paradigmatic change in spectacularity brought about by the rise of machine learning algorithms and computational power. We live in complex times, and the changes are difficult to understand as we are still exploring what it actually might mean to live with or along AI systems. Global crises like the COVID-19 pandemic, but also planetary crises, have brought into sharper focus how profoundly our collective behavior is steered by algorithmic hegemonic environments and frameworks as news and information cycles are becoming more and more narrow. In the current era, behavior is to a very considerable degree automated and surveilled by means of machine learning algorithms using complex data analytics as well as powerful visual and sound surveillance to track, to map, influence, and control society's behavior. In this very specific regime, power depends primarily on data, on invisible information harvested by computers, platforms, and networks, so that big private corporations and governments, police departments, and insurance companies, etc., can act on them. This phenomenon is today observed by a numerous amount of media theorists as well as media philosophers. For instance, social psychologist Shoshana Zuboff speaks of an instrumentarian power that has emerged and is making its way into all areas of life. This instrumentarianism very much shapes human behavior in surveillance capitalism through its most important tool, the algorithm. And media philosophy Matteo Pasquinelli describes machine intelligence as sociomorphic, meaning by that machine intelligence mirrors social intelligence in order to control it, leading him to state, I quote, that the rising hegemony of the paradigm of machine learning marks the final transition from cognitive capitalism to computational capitalism. So in this framework of computational capitalism, an entire computational culture logic unfolds in which not only reality is described through a set of norms describing who people should be and how they should act, but the people themselves traded their roles as citizens for the main occupation as consumers and users. In this context, AI or art for an ethical AI means a rectifying course for human action, or to phrase it differently, many artists are working to make the black box of AI visible and, in the best case, to open it and look inside. One of those artists that I want to stress on today is the artist Lynn Hirschman-Leeson, who for many decades has explored the impact of new technologies on social realities and the human psyche, as well as the potential and dangers of AI. In her interactive installation Shadow Stalker, Hirschman-Leeson extends her artistic concern with technological surveillance and control into the algorithmic realm of machine learning. In the centerpiece of the work is a touchscreen console that asks visitors to input their email address into an unseen computer. The input triggers an internet search. When entering on the small red square on the floor, motion sensors are activated and the bodies, outlines of the visitors are projected onto the surrounding walls in a bright, moving silhouette filled with the search results. Freshly mined personal data, phone numbers, current and past address, professional histories, bank account details, and credit scores emerge, offering a chilling reminder of our unbridled self-exposure. By literally externalizing our digital footprint and creating, with the help of programmers Mark Heller and Rachel Rose, a data shadow, Leeson Works provides a stark visualization of how we are all surveyed. In the accompanying video, the artist highlights how digital users have become producers of their own market value, as the film tackles predictive algorithm weaponized by corporations and governments to predict, score, and rank one's future employability and loan worthiness. In the film, one hears a polemic about predictive policing, the most known use of such algorithm. Increasingly, the program allows police officers to enhance their abilities to predict crime in predetermined red square zones on city maps created through analysis and past crime data. The occurrence of past crime becomes a predictor of a zone of future crime. Officers outsource their decision to enter these zones to an algorithm originally used to predict earthquakes. Legal scholars and activists are clear on the disturbing threat of such policing, especially as the original dirty data that establishes red square zones is based on a history of racialized oppressive policing that punishes the poor black citizens, immigrants, and non-binary peoples in American cities. Shadow Stalkers delivers a harsh critique on the techno-utopian belief in the benevolent efficacy of AI systems by articulating the problematic implications of employing them in social sphere. So the fact that the human self becomes a hybrid of desubjectified consumer and consumer object bears witness to a hyper-expansion of the logic of the spectacle, according to Jonathan Crary. Unlike in the 1960s, where the spectacle described a derealization and alienation of the subject in the world by means of technical reproduction and mass circulation, today we are facing a paradigmatic change in spectacularity that can be described as a fusion of surveillance and spectacle driven by digital technologies in which communication becomes a new source of control. Guy Debord captured the term spectacle in the 1960s and conceptualized it as a worldview that has actually been materialized, or in Marxist terminology, as a form of alienation of late capitalism. And Jean Baudrillard, considering the mass media of postmodern society in the 1980s, called hyperreality a state marked no longer by the imitation, but by the substitution of reality by way of science. However, today, in the realm of computational capitalism, AI and machine learning rather model their own realities that I would like to call hyper-artificial realities, in which a subjectless self navigates in a highly controlled present marked by a spectacle that can be described as a collective system of threat, fear, and compensatory voyeurism. So in this new logic, the way power works has very much changed. It is no longer on the level of a hegemonical content, but has become structurally hegemonic, a governmentality that reproduces itself without cessation. This means, in keeping with Gilles Deleuze's reflection on the control society, that now societies of control operating with computers are replacing disciplinary societies. Especially if we think that we are facing new algorithmic hegemonies, there is no such thing as an objective or neutral algorithm. Artificial intelligence will always be inextricably linked to the historical framework of race and labor by revealing inequalities and injustices embedded in the digital and social codes. Thus, if the source material is already subject to strong selection, the result material and the result delivered by AI will also be strongly biased. Or, to phrase it differently, as long as there is no objective and neutral pool of data with which AI is trained, AI will always be inscribed with prejudices following the partial worldview of its creators and sitting atop long histories of violence. But there are also different artistic experiments in which artists not only reflect on an alternative AI to the mainstream thinking, but actively intervene in a relationship between human and AI for creating new states of in-betweenness and new dissonances, to use Fred Moten's words, fostering environments in which the unknown can be explored. One such example is, for instance, the artist Martin Sims, whose artistic approach, grounded in Afrofuturism and cyberfeminism, challenges racial and gender stereotypes and investigates what it means to be black and a woman in a hyper-digitized world. In her most recent work, Neural Swamp, Sims extends further her research into machine systems that erase and exploit black bodies, voices, and narratives by using algorithm and artificial intelligence to question the politics of images and the technologies that allow for their production and consumption. Neural Swamp is a machine learning system. It runs off two neural networks. One network is the text that the characters speak. The model for the living generated text is trained on data of a wide array of text written by the artist, as well as screenplays, which were included in the data set to teach the model to write stage directions. And the second network is the characters' voices, which are trained through an end-to-end generative model using data sets of voice recordings of three well-known performers. These data sets are synthesized to generate the artificial voices of the characters who appear on the monitors in the exhibition, giving actually a live generated table read of a script in process. So Neural Swamp is built from text and speech of black female subjects. And the artist states herself, I quote, "The structural pressure between the forces of the institution and the black female labor used to create these experimental neural networks are, in a way, the work itself," end of quote. So the essence of Neural Swamp is to look closely at the systems and structures that create it. Considering the before said, the question of data seems to me crucial when using AI, as it is the data, not only its form and its content, but also attendant factors about its selection and use, that is the primary locus of bias in machine learning results. As the philosopher and cognitive scientist Brian Cantwell-Smith states, we need critical assessments that properly tease apart the respective contributions of these two dimensions of machine learning architectures. So when thinking of art for an ethical AI, strengthening our commitment to judgment seems to me key. As for now, the current approaches to AI have not yet begun to wrestle with the question of what constructing or developing judgment would involve. So bringing the question of judgment into this equation would mean to think further on the relationality between human and AI and on how this relation aims on contributing to an artistic, poetic, and also experimental attempt at and with AI, discovering the possibilities of a decolonial, queer feminist, and capitalist critical networked society. Art for an ethical AI would mean a poetic approach that disturbs, troubles, and unties the seemingly endless feedback loop in which we and the world are being smoothed down to financialized data points to be assessed, qualified, evaluated, and ultimately fed into algorithms, which are then thrust back to us, reshaping our desires and decisions. Thank you very much.
Now with Nora Al-Badri, we have to watch the time a bit. I'll just, at 11:30, the apéro is imperative, so we'll just stop then and go directly for drinking.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Before I start talking about 3 projects of mine, actually, I wanted to discuss a little bit about my artistic practice, but any artistic practice probably that deals with technology in general. Yeah, what it is about and why it matters, maybe. And so allow me to say a few words in advance. What I'm doing is like, maybe I'll choose the next slide already, because much of my work is about decoloniality, and it's based on the hypothesis that the internet and technology is like a digital profound space that used to come out of military research maybe, but today offers us emancipatory, very strong, as we have seen before, like cyber feminist, subcultural, any form of spaces that we actually want to create there. And my take on it is looking into the emancipatory of the space and the decolonial. So this is actually a title of a seminal paper from Zhdk and Wayne Young that I highly recommend, and it stands for a lot of things that comes up in my work always. And a lot, I mean, the digital to me is a social practice for sure. It's a cultural technique. In my case, to decolonize and democratize museums, actually, and collections. And today we are in one that I have also encountered in my artistic past, and I'll talk about this in the very end of the presentation. And I'm interested to activate those ghosts that we can actually see in the data sets of artifacts and objects. So, yeah. Maybe what is important, another aspect is the politics of representation with regards when we look into cultural data sets that is very specific to museums, but that can also be for universities and research, for example. And yeah, with my work, I aim to develop more like poetical narratives around it, emancipatory, decolonial, I cannot stress it enough, and to create a new form of techno heritage and speculative or anarchistic archaeology with what I'm doing. So one other slide, actually. Yes, this is von Frantz Fanon. The other one, the text forget about it. It's a quote that is very important also to me, and its struggles for decolonization are first and foremost about self-ownership. They are struggles to repossess, to take back, if necessary by force, that which is ours unconditionally and as such belongs to us. And I'm always quoting that because not just my practice, but when we are encountering museum collections, cultural data sets, or even research data sets, there is, in many cases, that very uncomforting, discomforting feeling with it that the data sets, of course, as we have heard before, are never neutral nor objective, but sometimes are dealt with it like this. So I'll show you 3 pieces of mine that deal with very different aspects of AI and ethics. One is image-based. That means it's based on GANs, generative adversarial networks. The other one is language-based, so based on natural language processing. And the last one on generative design that includes 3D printing, and that is not in the narrow sense AI-based, but still it could have been, but it's a few years ago. So yeah. So the first piece, let me see. So maybe one other thing, because we talk about ethics, and I actually had in my presentation a quote of Matteo Pasquinelli too, but I just thought I'll make it short, because what I'm interested in AI as a conceptual a tool for an artist is the collectivity, and we have that kind of collectivity through the sheer amount of data that can be involved, that doesn't need to be involved, of course, but also that all the data sets can be based on ancestral knowledge systems. And yeah, this is also the half of the title of a recent work of mine, Babylonian Vision and Neuronal Ancestral Sculpture Series, that I actually realized with the help of 2 machine learning experts, Nega Furutan and Milika Bejati at the ETH University in Switzerland at that time. And what we did was we scraped, one moment, let's go back one more. We scraped databases from the largest collections of museums of Mesopotamian, Neo-Sumerian and Assyrian artifacts. All of those museums are residing in the global north. And we used to train a neural network. We used those data sets to train a neural network the process was designed to yield more abstract insights into the search for a visual language of that time and the form and patterns of Mesopotamian artifacts, and delivering us some form of speculative archaeology. And here's just a few examples of input data sets from the data set of those 10,000 objects. And of course, I mean, a visual museum database contains images of original artifacts that we use to train this generative adversarial network. And those images, I think, when you look at them, they are already carrying time and memory themselves. You see patina, you see broken pieces. And of course, I think what is important to realize, and I think later we talk a bit more about the details of the technology, is that AI never sees an image, but only sees numbers in that case. And that this whole process is a very new form of image making with the so-called latent space for new, what's called synthetic images that the neural network is opening up. That is very relevant for artists, but for other fields, of course, as well. So when I want to explain it, if you train a neural network with hundreds of thousands of human portraits, it will abstract the concept of a portrait and generate new ones. It will not remix the ones you put in. And the same you have for the museum artifacts. And this is the part, actually, of the training process, how that looks in the machine. It's an iteration of the data sets and the process of learning. And this is actually the training data set where you still see the remnants of the museum for the sizes and the colors, the color palettes, but we removed that to get a more clean data set. Although, yeah, it was very heterogeneous, that's how it is called. But yeah, I'll get to that in a second. So yeah, those are some of the objects actually that were generated, and I think what is interesting here that with the GANs and those generated aesthetics, they certainly challenge our understanding, I think, and also obsessions with authenticity, for example, originality and authorship. So Nora Khan, a researcher here, she wrote on our perception of generating images, our rational understanding of the process actually helps us enter how provocative this method of image creation is. And with this understanding, we can linger analyzing, close reading the image flow for symbols and meaning. So what is the relationship actually between image making and GANs? I think it's a new... One moment. Oh, that's too much. Not here. I think, yeah, it's just a very, very potent way of getting some form of very new images. That is no magic involved at all, only numbers. And there is also not really something uncanny or dreamy. Those are words that are always described when you look at AI-generated images, especially. And also my colleague Casey Rias, another artist, pointed out that this is actually even more fascinating and can be a new paradigm like photography for image making in the arts and of course beyond the arts. And I think what is for me personally fascinating here is that what we find is the unexpected of large images, data sets of images, the very subjective and interpretative. It's kind of even like an essence of many images, but without any frame or, yeah, I think in a way what I found so interesting here is that the way we look at images or we describe them is very similar to how the Mesopotamians themselves actually did that. And I know it's a long quote, but I love it still. It's for the ancient Mesopotamians, an immediate encounter with the past was possible through the images and artifacts of antiquity, not because works of art represented in a secondary or removed manner historical or mythological scenes kept in collections, but because of the very direct encounter with the past itself. And actually, this is another aspect I'm interested in the whole AI field of AI, because it might be a future-oriented technology, but it's very much based on the past. And in many frames, I think we forget that. We tend to forget that, or we even want to not reveal that, I think. But this is also a strength of it. And so the produced images, I think, can be even photorealistic, of course, but they are not photos, because each one of them is made up from the noise of hundreds of epochs, that what you saw in the training, by the neural network itself. So the question, of course, will stick around: how new and original are those images really? Is this verisimilitude, and does that even matter? And I think there are even larger questions when it comes to what knowledge and forms in the arts are passed on from generations to generations, how we as artists are inspired. And for this reason, I think the output images, I wanted to refer to them as ancestral. And I think this actually is true for every artistic process. Is it based, if it's based on technology or if it's just analog, anything basically. And but the GANs still, they allow us to see large semantics basically of large visual data sets. And here are a few other experiments we did with different forms of GANs. So they will give you very different results, some more abstract and some more photorealistic. And here I brought with me a few of the images, and you can see, I think I didn't mention really that so far, that the input was also jewelry. It was cloth, pots, of course, many pots, vases, broken pieces. And this is also a part of the work where you can see the process actually of the image making, and that there is not really a single image that, that is relevant, I think, here. So let me see, the time is running. I think what is important for the GAN technology is the abstraction of the output allows us to contemplate also the images and their language as a form of visual memory that is not just limited to the input object, but a memory that transcends them. And yeah, we can generate basically new memory objects. And my contention, therefore, is that machine learning is seen as a technology that is performing and processing our collective memory. And yeah, I think, therefore, it makes absolutely sense to apply it also to our cultural big data sets. And I mean, one important aspect of the whole data set discussion is, I think, that how we will use that kind of technology and how we will make sense of our culture is that machine learning definitely makes patterns visible, including those that we didn't know about and those that are also not talked about. And I think in Wendy Chun's essay, Queering Homophily, she describes how machine learning can actually offer, and I'm quoting, the generative power of discomfort. And discomfort, as I said in the beginning, is indissociable from decolonization. And so this is the last part for this piece. Actually, it's just a background, but I think it's important because I'm trying to address that topic in this work as well. Is the question of representation in data sets that are used to train AI. And today, data sets are trained with millions of images governed by large corporations, mainly with ImageNet or open images, where 80% around of the content originates from the global north. So this is some form of visual hegemony, and while, yes, it's true, not being seen may often have a very big advantage these days in the surveillance age, but it can also lead to being dominated by one visual culture. And so machinic abstraction in most cases is also oversimplifying reality. So what happens is we are missing a lot. The diversity of the world, I'd say, is infinite and cannot be represented. And it is a diversity that is very distinct of specific and local knowledge systems in many cases, modes of being, modes of thinking and feeling, and of interacting with the world, conceiving the world. So what we see in many cases is some form of auto-essentialization. But what we can do to counter that, to create more emancipatory spaces, for example, is to create our own databases, for example, as in this project and as in many other artistic projects is happening. And the thing is, as of today, many AI systems are that black box system that means it doesn't show its inner workings, and it's almost impossible to reverse its input data from its output. And that can be obviously very harmful and is much discussed in our society because of privacy issues, bias issues, of course, but it can also be turned around into an advantage, as in my project, because ironically, the chosen museums, they never wanted to give me the data. And this is another question for how open is data, how accessible is data, who owns the data, basically. So the chosen museums, where they are the largest collection of Mesopotamian artifacts in the global north, but I'm not naming the museums, they cannot make a legal case against me and this form of image creation, because of the black box, they will never be able to prove the data set for the training. So all those mechanisms can be used against itself, and it can also even be some form of emancipatory. The next project, very quickly. Yes, it's just it's a project that talks about, one moment. This is, the Nefertiti bot I did with Nikolai Nellis at 2018, and it's talking, it's basically based on natural language processing, and in that case it was a chatbot that is streaming of museums, and it was basically as a voice of the subaltern taking an agency for objects. So what happens when objects speak for themselves? And it's asking questions about post-authorship through machine intelligence, because it's very collective effort. And I'll just give you a quick example, and I think then I should be done.
After layer and layer of restoration, there is not much left of the artifact itself. I am no slave to the original. And yes, there is truth in data, even power. And now we gain sovereignty to tell our stories. We are intercepting the dominance of Western museums towards object biographers. The Imperial Museum is obsolete. The process of the transition of the museum has begun. Embrace uncertainties. Welcome to the era of techno heritage.
So this is just an example of one line that the bot was discussing with the museum audience about museums and about decoloniality. And what is important, I think, here to state is it's a female bot, but it's not a servant bot as many others. Until today, we have those things, but it's a very strong, opinionated, highly biased, namely it's my bias, of course. Yeah, so the audience was in the beginning fascinated by the criticality of the machine, but of course, I mean, after some time discussing with the machine, you could also see the limitations. So it's kind of, yeah, you create a moment of magic where you think, wow, it's such a reflected machine talking with you, or the object talking with you, but at some time you realize, wait, who actually wrote the lines, or who wrote the algorithm? And yeah, maybe the last project I'll skip, and I'll have it in our conversation because it deals with the dinosaur that is in this museum. It's yeah, this fossil futures, and it's also about the data set of the dinosaur that comes from Tanzania. And it's a history, it's a very troubled history of the Natural History Museum that is not so much talked about. It's from, yeah, Tendaguru, a sacred place in Tanzania, basically, that came together during colonial times with 230,000 tons, so hundreds of boats only with dinosaur bones, but of course together with other wares from and other stuff from Tanzania. And so we have similar, like, let's say, histories in the Northern Hemisphere museums. But what we can do now as artists to use the material in new forms, that is only actually possible in the digital and not in the analog, of course, because I can't just go downstairs and take a bone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nora, for your presentation. I'm sorry to be the bad cop with the time, but we have institutions giving us our frames and spaces. I would like to invite also Marie-France in front. And maybe before we lose more time with me asking questions, I would like to address the audience if there are any pressing questions coming up. Otherwise, I can be the icebreaker with questions. There is a question. You have this card, so there's one is with a question mark, and if you just have a comment, which is also quite common among scientists, you can also just comment. Yes?
Hello, so thank you very much for two interesting presentations. My question is a little bit more for the first speaker, because some of the things that you mentioned, historically, there's a little bit needing more differentiation between different parts of the world and how to deal with the challenges of AI session. So, take an example about predictive policing in the States. There's a reason why we don't have that in Europe. When we look at how digitalization AI works in China, this is a different context. I hope you understood me. So I felt a little bit, you know, you were making some quite sweeping statements about global capitalism, but how this works in different parts of the world is quite differently. And I wonder whether you would see a connection also, and here I come with my interest in policymaking, because at the EU level, this is what we want to do. We want to create an AI policy. The AI Act is currently under discussion, which actually ensures that we don't end up in situations where you have such biased systems. Now, this may be very difficult because the data in any case is biased, But I was wondering whether you would see there also a contribution that the artistic community can make to make sure that we have the right legislative framework in Europe in place.
Yes, thank you very much for your remark and question. I think you're really right in what you were saying. And I think that maybe just to try to give you my thoughts on what you said, I think that the reason why the data and AI is used so differently is because, of course, depending on in which region or where it is used, there is another, I would say, politics at stake. And as I was trying to show also in my input, I mean, of course, the way we use AI is also sitting on top of different, I would call them hegemonic histories, you know, so histories of violences that are, I would say, globally, but of course also depending on where, also very different. So I think that, as you said, it's different in China, it's different in the States, but I was trying to show that still the common point is that there is a history of violence and somehow it is perpetuated in the use or the way we might use AI. And I think that the role that art can play, especially in creating such, I would say, laws or thinking of, yeah, on the EU level, is the question of politics and communities. Because I think that this is very much the way where art can play, I would say, a reflexive role on showing what it means to produce knowledge and how knowledge might be produced, in the sense that I would not, you know, differentiate between real or artificially produced knowledge, but as I was trying to show which data are we using and how are we using that data. And maybe it is on that level that art can play a role on, you know, making aware where this data is coming from and how it is then used and by whom, you know. And this was also the aspect I was trying to draw on the question of judgment, because in the end, those AI algorithms, they are still reckoning machines, you know. They don't have their own judgment, but it's still the humans, I think, that operate on this judgmental level. And I think that this is also where art comes into play. And the thing I was trying to focus on, and I think that Nora also showed it in her presentation, is this relation between human and machine, you know, and I'm not trying to differentiate, but I'm actually trying to stress that we should not think in this kind of dualities, you know, between human and technology and nature, and but I think it's more important to think it as one, but then to think of how we use it and what we do with it, you know, yeah.
We have another
maybe
question.
May I add something? Just a question for all of us, maybe, because that touches about it. How to prevent bias? I don't think it's possible, and this is the answer is like it's impossible, basically. And to realize that this is the most important aspect. This would be my response. It's yeah, and and it's more a philosophical question in the end, how we deal with it. Yes. But preventing...
We can't prevent it, but we can create awareness, basically. No?
Yeah.
So we have in the back and then here in the middle. Maybe first in the back, the question.
I think there's a microphone coming to you.
Hi. My question is about ethics in the sense of like copyright and plagiarism. You have already today, you have like some AI platforms like Stable Diffusion, I think is one of them, where you can input some photos and say like, make something out of this in the style of some certain artist. So it's already possible to make some great art like with AI and put it online and sell it as NFT, but it's already fed with a lot of art from other artists. That's also like with the example from before with the talking museum guy. Like there was also like like you think who said this before? Like it's the same with like texts. Like that's my question. Like, what do you think about this situation?
I mean, it's complicated. Copyright in the arts is always complicated, I would say, and the questions of authorship and how do you deal with that. But in some way, I would say, not for this very popular stable diffusion models, but for other ways of working with, for example, input images. We are in the same realm as with music and remixing things. So there is already a super, I think, differentiated laws about that. And in the moment, as soon, for example, for a new artwork of mine, I'm also using videos from public speaking figures to put it into a neural network and create new speeches from that figures. And then it's also the same, it's the same question basically. But as soon as you broadcast something and you give the right up on the material basically, but for artists and artworks, I would say it's a bit different. And also what we are seeing now, the whole output of thousands of those DALI images, for example, I find it highly problematic because they are also trained on maybe, if not a handful, but a few artists that are now, definitely being exploited, but they even don't really know about it because it's not transparent. And I think as long as the databases are not transparent, we have a big problem here, for example. But it's a very complex issue.
And I think that maybe, I think that it's also a question of what you want to achieve, you know. So I think that the examples on how Nora is working, if I may say, and the examples I showed, those are examples that use AI as a kind of tool to work with, you know, to produce an artwork that has, to say, a kind of aesthetic value on its own. And I think that what you maybe were speaking of, you know, where AI machines are fed with DALIs or other, you know, I think that those are more, I would almost say, experiments on, you know, how to train machines to create look-alike artworks, you know. But then the question is, what you want to achieve, you know? Is it to train the machines and to see how far you can get the algorithms, you know? Or is it really in the purpose of creating, you know, an erratic, to use Benjamin's work, artwork, you know? So I think that it's a little bit different, I guess, on how maybe artists work themselves with AI to question AI and you know, to question those questions we were addressing, you know, of such questions as where is data coming from, surveillance, etc., you know, or is it in a purpose, you know, to see in a kind of more explorative way how far can you get the machine, you know, to learn and reproduce.
Because maybe like there was a, Nora pointed out to me a couple of months or weeks ago that there was a ruling for in terms of this image generation and diffusion models where I think it was in the UK or the US that the ruling was that these images generated by AI don't have any copyright. So Nora said, this is really bad, and it was funny because she's actually more in, as you saw, in the hacker context and kind of copyleft context. So you would say, okay, if we get rid of copyright, it's actually good because everybody can access it. But at the same time, it's also, how to say, as you heard from Nora, also a challenge to authorship of artists. And I think at the moment, we have at the ETH some PhD researchers who are also researching exactly this topic of how can we deal with this copyright situation in artificial intelligence generated images at the moment, but there's of course a lot of other, how would you say, machine generated, just let's say stuff, you know. So it depends a little bit on which country we are. I know just for Switzerland that there's no regulation, no law yet, so that's something still in the research phase, so to say. Maybe one last question from the center, and then we have to go and get some alcohol. Topic.
Yeah, it was exactly the same question. Is there also an ethical discussion about use of AI within the artist community? And I understood maybe yes, the first steps are taken, but is it really the case that this is also discussed in your own community? Are there some ethical principles if we use AI as artists? Is it limited to Europe? Is it globally? I don't know it. It's yeah, learning question from my side.
Yes, I would say there is. I think Marie-France said that how, I don't know, yes, I can say it, how good artists deal with AI is in a reflexive way. So they, at the same time, use the tool, but also reflect about it and make that clear and even as an experience for the viewer. So it's maybe not a big discourse, but I think all the good artists that use AI as a tool try really to understand it well enough. Because this is the beginning of asking the most important questions and to use it in a good way, whatever that means. But of course, there are many other people who rather play with it and they don't ask the reflexive or critical questions to the tool. It's both.
It's also on the project we're doing at the AI Center that Nora mentioned shortly, that is the Post-Truth Museum. We had like this moment, because it deals with deepfake, with our engineers and scientists, where they said we can't do it because of the regulatory dimension to it. You know, so deepfakes have a lot of, how do you say, regulations inscribed in the software itself. And then we had like this discussion about, let's say, artistic freedom and scientific freedom. So in a way, sometimes you can also, you know, how would you say, expand or bend these regulations a little bit with artistic freedom and hopefully also in that sense with scientific freedom, because over there it's maybe not so much legal frameworks, but maybe corporate frameworks, or as Marie-France said, the capitalist frameworks that also limit scientific research to some points, because we have to be productive on the one side. And I saw a lot of scientists who are very playful, so we're not too much in danger of being too productive in that sense, and also financially rewarding, you know. So I think this is maybe also another approach which we can bring in with an artistic perspective, is a certain playfulness and lightness in scientific research, in engineering, and another change of perspective in the questions of policy making. And also I think with art as such is dealing with a lot of ethical topics. It's bringing in a lot of different epistemologies, like indigenous AI, for example, or already mentioned queer feminist AI. So actually the idea is a little bit, by bringing art into this tech context, is also to bringing in different knowledge systems that influence policymaking, programming, the data sets, and so on.
And I think that, of course, artists, you know, they reflect on the reality they're living in, you know, and I think that as much AI becomes more and more a reality of our everyday life, artists are reflecting on that, you know. And so when they use AI, it's not that they are only reflecting on AI, but they're reflecting on, as I was trying to show, on the politics and the social aspects they're living in. And AI is becoming part of it, especially because this is what's happening, you know. And so they reflect on the reality we're living in.
We have another 24 minutes and 46 seconds for our apéro. If there's no more questions left, I would suggest we discuss them with the apéro. I don't know what exactly it is. I hope there will be some white wine and champagne and everything. Yes? Okay, cool. Thank you very much for joining us this morning for this discussion on how art can influence an ethical AI. And I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the Berlin Science Week.